Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Lonnie Stonich, the Executive Director of FAN. We're a nonprofit that presents programming exploring human development across the lifespan. I'm honored to welcome you to today's conversation between Professor Scott Galloway and Professor Adam Alter. Thanks for joining us. Our YouTube channel has an archive of over 300 videos of past events, so be sure to subscribe to the channel to get updates when new recordings are posted. And now let's welcome our two fabulous guest for today. Adam Alter is a professor of marketing at NYU's Stern School of Business and the Robert Stansky Teaching Excellence Faculty Fellow with an affiliated appointment in NYU's Psychology Department. He is the New York Times bestselling author of 3 books, and FAN was privileged to host Adam for 2 of them. First in 2017 for Irresistible, and second in 2023 for Anatomy of a Breakthrough. We're honored to welcome Adam back with us today. Joining him, of course, we're thrilled to be presenting Scott Galloway, also professor of marketing at NYU's Stern School of Business, and who is named one of the world's best business professors by Poets and Quants. Professor Galloway has founded 9 companies, including Profit, Red Envelope, L2, and Section, where he also teaches. He's the New York Times bestselling author of The Four, The Algebra of Happiness, Post-Corona, Adrift, America in 100 Charts, and the new book, The Algebra of Wealth. It's my pleasure to bring both of you, Adam Alter and Scott Galloway, to FAN.
And thanks, Scott, for doing the event. I'm excited to have a chat with you. So a big thank you first to Lonnie and to FAN for inviting me back for this, my 3rd event with the organization. It's a terrific organization, as many of you already know. And then I'm especially excited to be doing this event with Scott. As you know, as you heard, we're both professors at the business school at NYU at Stern. There are a lot of business school professors who have very big, rich, thorough, interesting ideas, but they don't communicate very well. There are a lot of professors who communicate well, but their ideas are a little bit thin, maybe not all that rigorous. It's incredibly rare in the academic world or in business schools to have a professor who has both of those talents together. And Scott is obviously a great exemplar of that kind of professor. He is a guy with big ideas, important ideas, rigorous ideas. And of course, as he says in his book, Algebra of Wealth, one of his big talents is that he's a great communicator. So we're incredibly lucky to have those big ideas brought to us through Scott's special talent for communicating them through his various podcasts, his books, through Section, his online education platform, and through lots of other channels. So Scott, thanks so much for doing this. I'm excited to chat to you.
Thanks, Adam. And let me just say, I'm really enjoying this podcast so far. This has been great. So please continue.
Yeah, I'll continue in this vein. So I'm going to ask you some questions about your book, but then I also want to ask you some broader questions about your ideas beyond the book and maybe where you come to your ideas. I think a lot of people are interested not just in your book, but in your ideas at large. But I'm going to start with a question that I'm often asked when I launch a book, and I think it's a good question to begin with in general. Which is how you got to this book. You have the Algebra of Happiness, which has a similar title. This is the Algebra of Wealth. You've got the book The Four, which focuses on specific companies. You've got Post-Corona, which talked about what happened during the coronavirus pandemic and then how we should deal with that. This is similar to those in some respects, but it's also a little bit different. What made you decide to write Algebra of Wealth?
So I'll go first, but then I want you to discuss your torture, because the reality is I'm not sure there is an algorithm for picking your book and trying to understand what works and what doesn't. If I were to try and plot what would be the most successful books, or at least the most critically acclaimed, it would be inversely correlated to what has actually happened. And that is, you just really don't know. I don't know. I thought my best book was The Algebra of Happiness. It sold the least, and now it's had the longest tail. And then other books anyways, you just don't know. In terms of the process, I'm very fortunate, and that is we have an unfair advantage, Adam, and that is we stand in front of a bunch of people and we vet our ideas. It's like stand-up comedy. Supposedly a 1.5 hour Netflix special is like 700 appearances in the Comedy Store, where people just workshop their comedy and they pick the best 90 minutes. Yeah. We get to stand in front of a bunch of people, talk about a bunch of ideas. I have a newsletter that goes out to 500,000 people every Friday, No Mercy, No Malice. And I can kind of tell by the comments when I've tapped into a subject matter that people find really, really interesting. And then you and I both share the same book agent. And greatness is in the agency of others. Wait, are you with Jim Levine?
No.
Are you with Jim? Okay.
No,
we don't share the same agent.
Yeah, they're both great.
but they have a, they'll call. My book agent Jim came in and said he saw a video of me talking about the four Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google DLD, and he came in and he said this could be a book, and I had no idea. So it was really him. And then I'll do a bunch of workshopping. Well, I'll write a bunch about it. I'll do a bunch of sample chapters, test them on my newsletter, beta test them, and then try and, start putting it together. And then what I've tried to do, though, that I think is a little bit different here is if you look at media, if you look at movies, something like 70% of revenue is sequels or franchises. It's Thor 8, right? It's Aliens 5, whatever it is. And in books, it strikes me we're always trying to start a new franchise. And I saw the Bill O'Reilly series, Killing RFK,
Yeah.
Killing Lincoln. And I thought, I'm sick of trying reinventing the wheel here. I want to start a platform and a franchise. And so I did the Algebra of Happiness, Algebra of Wealth. I just signed a 3-book deal to do the Algebra of Masculinity, the Algebra of Work, and the Algebra of Mating. But I'm trying to figure out a way to move to a platform where instead of reinventing the wheel, I started at letter L with the audience and the construct and the type. And I don't know if that'll be successful. But the other thing I have found is you want to listen to your publisher in the market, but you don't necessarily, if you have a strong instinct, you want to ignore everybody. My first book, I was told, don't have any charts. It looks like a textbook. And I have 100+ charts in every book now. But at the end of the day, you have to have a vision for something you're going to stick to because you think you have something different. But my process is testing, talking to a bunch of people, and then just starting to write. And writing books, and I want to ask you what your process is. It's the hardest thing I do, hands down. It's harder than teaching. It's harder than TV. It's harder than investing. It's the hardest thing I do. Every time I sign a book contract and get an advance, I freak out because that means you actually have to do the damn thing. And I typically write very late at night, and I have a bunch of other people working with me, which helps me. But it's the by far the most difficult thing I do. A third of advances are supposedly returned by the authors because they just can't get through the book. But my process is beta testing with my newsletter, socializing it with a bunch of people. I'm trying to build a construct or a platform, algebra of ... And I personally write at night. Most writers write in the morning. So I don't think there's an alchemy of creativity. And then I spend a lot of time in the editing. I would say I spend more time. I just start writing like crazy. I'm like, that's the advice I would give to anyone who wants to be an author. Just start writing and then go back and start fixing and editing. And even if I've had my editor come back with an entire chapter and say, would start over. That's the sum of her notes. And then find your own creative process. So I'll turn it back to you. What is your process?
Yeah, I'm a nighttime writer as well. I've done 80% of my writing between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m. So I write
funny.
the same way you do. It's the only time it's quiet.
Right.
So that's certainly how I feel. The one thing that I find is when you can't get the words out, when it's tough, there's a great technique that I heard about, which was that you should write the very worst sentences you can. Lower the bar all the way to the floor. Let yourself just, pour out all the bad stuff because what's behind it is the good stuff. And I've found that to be true. You kind of grease the wheels. And so I'll often write for 20 minutes, write some bad stuff, and then the good stuff follows. So that's my process. But this idea of having a platform and having 5 books that begin with algebra, I think is really interesting. But I specifically about this one, about Algebra of Wealth, one of the things I noticed as I read through was, so for those of you who have read the book, you'll know. Those of you who haven't, the book is incredibly broad. Tackles a lot of topics. It tackles some very basic finance concepts. It tackles some kind of higher order philosophies. You talk a lot about stoicism and the importance of being stoical in the face of the hardship of having to work across a career, for example. You talk a lot about, I think there's a lot in there that's about the social side of wealth. So you talk about what it was like when your kids were born and you felt that you'd be maybe a bit irresponsible with some of your resources and you didn't have as much as you wanted to have to raise them the way you wanted. You talk a little bit about this idea that buying a private jet was, you use the term irrational, but then you talk about the fact that you're effectively getting back 130 days over 10 years with your boys. And I think if you ask yourself the question, at the end of your life, if someone came to you and said, you don't have much longer to live, how much would you pay for 130 extra days with your boys as teens? The answer for me, I have a son and a daughter who are a bit younger than your boys. The answer for me is infinite amounts. Whatever I have, I would throw at that. So how much of wealth for you is about money, and how much of them is it about the social side of things, relationships? You end the book talking about your boys and your mom. It seems like wealth for you is really just a vehicle to having these really meaningful, strong relationships. Is that accurate?
Yeah, Adam, you and I mean, we always felt, I think, a certain, I don't know, we always empathize about, I won't say we liked each other. Well, actually, I will say that. We liked each other the moment we met.
Yeah.
And I think we have similar backgrounds. And that is, we went into academia, I think you're very middle class. I'm sort of upper, lower middle class. I had no money growing up. Money was very important to me, and it always has been. I didn't want to change the world. I didn't want to be a good person. I wanted economic security. And that's what my focus has been. And I'm not ashamed of that. I think more people are that way than they'd like to admit. And then what I realized is, okay, if you're fortunate enough to get to a certain level of economic security, all right, now what? And that is, the studies show that, and I parrot a lot of your work, that at the end of people's lives, the things they regret the most are that they wish they'd stay in contact with their friends. They wish they'd been more forgiving of themselves. I constantly am talking about your research around people in palliative care. But going back to some of the things you said, I woke up, I've always made a lot of money, but because of a lack of character, because of divorce, because of a lack of forgiveness in my personal relationships, some personal failings, I woke up at 42 when my oldest son had the poor judgment to come marching out of my girlfriend, because in concert with the great financial recession, I was at NYU making, I don't know, 160 or 180 grand a year. And I was effectively broke because my company that I owned $30 million in stock in, I wasn't smart enough to diversify. I wasn't smart enough to take some money off the table. I wasn't smart enough to realize that the market is bigger than any individual. And overnight, I had negative net worth. And I remember just being so painfully nauseous and terrified in the delivery room. And it had nothing to do with the delivery. It was that the first thing I felt when my son was born was failure. That as a man, I had already failed this child, because despite all the money I had made, all the opportunity, all the blessings, all the privilege, I was financially insecure. And now I was no longer just failing myself, I was failing my son. And that type of failure, I had never registered it before as a father. And that was the first emotion I felt when my son was born. And it is a devastating emotion for a man. And so I got very, very serious about economic security from that point. And I got very focused on businesses and moved to Florida so I could save a lot more than I spent, and got very, very focused on creating an army of capital that could, go out and kill for me and my family while I was sleeping. And quite frankly, I just got really lucky. From 2008 to 2024, the last 16 years have been this extraordinary bull market. And I got wealthy. And talking about, the plane, I'm an atheist, and it's a tremendous source of power for me, because I do believe at some point I'll look into my son's eyes and know that our relationship is coming to an end. And it dictates a lot of my decisions now. And also just how fast it's going. When I met you, you were literally a kid. You were like this you were like this young superstar fat. You were literally a kid, and now you're no longer a kid. It just goes so goddamn fast. And so I decided, and one of the decisions I've made, I got to my number. And once I got to my number, I decided anything above that, I'm either going to spend or give it away. And I spend it not on things as much, but on things that give me more time with my kids or cement the relationships. So I'm taking, the whole family and extended family and my sister to Africa, and it'll be a crazy amount of money, and I'm happy to spend it. The jet thing, I did straight analysis. My jet costs me about 1.2 million a year. I'll have it for 10 years. That's $12 million. I will save 13 days a year, that when I go to Kohler to speak to the Kohler company, I can go in the morning and come back in the afternoon. Commercially, it would take me 2.5 days. I get at least 13 to 18 days. So you're doing the math. At the end of my life, am I going to want the 12 million back, or am I going to want the 6 months with my family back? And let's be clear, you got to have the 12 million, and I have it. But that is a significant amount of money for me. But for me, it's like money is the means. The ends is a lack of anxiety and a freedom to invest in key relationships and cement those relationships. Because I know at the end of my life, I'm not going to be surrounded by wealth. I want to be comfortable. I want to be in a nice surrounding. But the thing that will give me comfort at the end will be a function of how much I've invested in relationships. And so now for me, that I'm very lucky, I have the economic security to take care of the necessities, which by the way is not easy, especially if you live in New York. You got to make a shit ton of money just to cover the necessities. But once I got there, I said, all right, I'm going to pivot to investing in experiences that make me feel closer to the people I love.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting your definition of wealth, because you often traditionally think of wealth as fast cars and big houses and all that sort of stuff. That when you're a kid, that's what wealth means. It's having good stuff and having fun. And it's very sort of positive and you lean forward into it and you enjoy it. But the way you define wealth in the book is that it's the absence, as you say, the absence of economic anxiety. So that's an interesting sort of twist, because it's really about avoiding this very negative emotional state that seems to be a big part of the way we live our lives now. We're constantly trying to sort of make sure we have enough. I think a lot of us, unless you grew up being incredibly wealthy and you never experienced having less, a lot of us know what it's like to have a little bit less, or to have that sense, even just in small doses of economic anxiety. And I thought that was an interesting way to frame the book, that it was about trying to minimize this negativity rather than maximizing just lots of positivity, like that feeling that time is slipping away. Is that how you think about wealth, that it's essentially just taking away the bad stuff so that what really matters shines through? Or is there a part of it that for you is just hedonic? It's fun, you enjoy it, you spend it, you get good stuff out of it? Or is that not as much a part of it for you?
Well, they're both wonderful, but
Yeah.
when I think about our elected leaders, I worry that they're so old now that they can't really relate to the challenges facing a 17-year-old girl who has a lack of self-esteem because she's being bullied on Instagram, that they can't understand the challenges a 23-year-old male faces, where 210 times a day gets a notification to bet on this week's Kansas City Chiefs game, and maybe with a lack of economic opportunity or romantic opportunities and a brain that is very risk aggressive, he just starts gambling money he doesn't have. And I worry that these individuals really don't empathize. I also worry that the people who raise the most money win. And I worry that there's not enough people who came from um, economic strain. People just don't, unless you've been there. It's not to say that you're not a good person. It's not to say you don't have sympathy, but can you really empathize? I remember, you know, raised by a single mother, our household income was never more than $40,000. And what people don't realize is it's like you have a ghost following you around, whispering in your mother's ear, you're not worthy.
Yeah.
You failed. Your mom failed and you failed. When I didn't get into UCLA, when I applied, I didn't get in, people would say, well, why don't you just apply to Michigan or another school? It's like, I don't know how to buy an airline ticket. I don't have money. I don't know how to get on a plane and go to Michigan. I can't ask my mom to pay for an airfare to go to the university. I got to start working. I have no money. I didn't have that confidence. I remember I have this story in my book about losing a second jacket in a week. I'm very absent-minded. And jackets cost $33 from J.C. Penney's, and we did not have that money. And the amount of anxiety, kids who live in low-income households have higher resting blood pressure than kids in middle and upper. I mean, I just don't think you can really understand, because the poor people we have contact with through the media are success stories. And we like to believe that poor people are higher character and will ultimately overcome these obstacles. But people really aren't in touch with, from day one, just how difficult it is. I'm a big believer in affirmative action, but I think it should be based on money, not any physical characteristics. So for me, the book for me is not about what should be, it's about what is. And America becomes more like itself every day. America is a loving, generous place if you have money. It's a rapacious, violent place if you don't. Our job, what we do, Adam, is the best job in the world as long as we can supplant it with other income. If you were a young faculty in the humanities at NYU and trying to raise kids in New York, I gotta think it'd be so stressful on your relationship with your spouse and your kids. So, I wish someone had told me that with a little bit of discipline, a little bit of savings character, a little bit of understanding the power of diversification, the power of compound interest over time, to get focused on your main hustle, to recognize that money and wealth isn't just about how much money you make, it's about how much money you save. And the sooner you start saving, you develop this vicious army that gets bigger and bigger and bigger for you, and how fast time is going to go. this is almost a memo to myself that I wish I just made a few small changes in my 20s and 30s that would have saved me so much mental duress in my 40s. And the other thing, it's like we don't talk about money. You and I used to talk about money. We would talk about how much money we made through speeches, through books. Friends should talk about money with each other. You can't be great at tennis if you don't talk about it. You gotta know, like, how much should I be making at NYU? How much should I get for a book advance? What should I be doing with my money? What are the tax advantages? Oh, wait, my friend just bought a house, and if you sell it in 2 years, you get 500,000. If you want to be great at anything, and in America, you want to be great at money, you absolutely want to be great at money, then you need to learn these things. And the book is really a focus on an individual, and this individual is the following. You've read that study where 5 people who hang out together become like each other, same body mass index, same politics, same teams they support, same religion, live in the same neighborhoods. Where there's greater variance, though, is where they end up economically. There are people who I just interviewed this basketball player, Rex Chapman, who was making 10 million a year, ended up broke at 40. Something like 2/3 of basketball players end up bankrupt despite making millions, sometimes tens of millions. And there are millions of public service employees that through forced savings offered by the government, which tops them up, they retire millionaires. So of those 5 people that look, smell, and feel alike, one ends up wealthy. And I wanted to understand, what are the behaviors and the strategies of the person next door who doesn't make any more money than you, but at our age, Adam, ends up just financially much more secure. And that is really what the book is. Like it's like working out. A little bit of discipline when you're younger, you can get to a 7 or an 8. At some point you're going to have cell death and it's going to come down. But do you want to start incurring the cell death from a 7 or an 8 or from a 4? And you can get to real financial security much more easily the earlier you start and with certain behaviors. And it struck me how many people in America have absolutely no idea how to do this. And that's really what the book is about. The book isn't about being a baller and being a billionaire. It's like, assuming I have a good job, assuming I'm a decent character person, how do I end up surprisingly financially secure relative to my peers?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you talked about the teachers, this idea that you can make a huge amount of money as a basketball player and then end up with nothing, but teachers who are sometimes forced to save for decades end up doing very, very well by the end of their careers, even with a modest income. There is that sort of tension in the book a little bit, I think, that you've got on the one side of the spectrum, you've got one end of the spectrum, you've got these people who are incredibly focused on the long run. They're very future focused, maybe people in the FIRE movement, so the financial independence, retire early movement, this idea that you should deprive yourself now, save 50, 80, 90% of your income now so that you can retire incredibly young, maybe in your 30s or 40s. So that's one end of the spectrum, is this very future focused way of seeing the world with respect to wealth. The other version is, I'm young for a certain amount of time. Why don't I just enjoy that time? Spend everything I get while I'm young, and then I can figure out the rest later on. And you talk about a little bit of both of these, this idea that it's important not to just live for retirement, but also the importance of working long hours and applying yourself, and the stoicism that's required to work for decades, even when it's hard. How do you balance this yourself? How much of what you're doing is about the here and now and enjoying the moment, and how much of it is for that future? And I guess as a side issue, it probably gets easier to balance those two when you have more, and it's harder when you have less, because you've got to be more present focused. Is focusing on the future kind of a luxury of having a little bit more?
Well, here's the thing. You can have it all. You just can't have it all at once unless you're born with rich parents. And it just involves a sober conversation with yourself and ideally a partner you're aligned with. And my first bonus check from Morgan Stanley, if I had taken and invested it in the S&P, it would be worth $7 million right now. My first bonus check, first year out of UCLA, if I had just taken it and put it in SPY, it'd be worth $7 million right now. Instead, I went out and bought a BMW, and I hung swim goggles from the rearview mirror, even though I didn't swim, because I thought that would make me more attractive to potential mates. And so I empathize with people in their 20s who want to signal their value as a potential mate. They want to have fun. Go to Coachella, occasionally buy a pair of Manolo Blahniks, but start at least developing a savings muscle. I do think there's a happy medium. Youth is wonderful. You want to have some fun. You want to take a backpack and maybe spend a little, more than you have and go with some friends on a summer abroad. You're just going to remember that the rest of your life. You're not going to pick up a backpack when you're our age and go with mates around Thailand and be happy living in an $18 a night thatched hut in Phuket. You can do that. I mean, take advantage, seize youth, but at the same time, try and develop a savings muscle. Also, just around the sober conversation, when I talk to our kids, Adam, and I say collectively our, but the students, when I ask them how much money they expect to be making by the time they're 35, about a half, 2/3 of them expect to be in the top 1% of US household income earners. They expect to be in the top 1%. And then I ask them what's the most important thing about their career, and they'll use the word balance. And I'm like, are you high?
Yeah.
You expect to be in the top 1% and have hobbies and balance? And what I have found is that unless you're smart enough to inherit money, if you want to be in the top 1% of anything, you've got to spend a good 20 years, if not 30 years, pretty much doing nothing but working. And I want to be clear, it comes at a cost. It cost me my hair, it cost me my first marriage. It cost me a lot of relationships, a lot of stress. And this sounds crass, but it was worth it because I have a ton of balance now. Now, that's not the right way, but it's my way. I always knew that at a later stage in my life, I wanted to have the economic flexibility to be very focused on doing exactly what I wanted. I wanted certain flexibility. I wanted a ton of time with my kids. I think quality time is a myth. I think you want garbage time with your kids, and the only way you get garbage time is to have money such that you can just spend a ton of time. I spend a ton of time with my kids now, and the quality moments happen unexpectedly. We're taking the trash out. I'm driving them to their soccer practice and they say something. And that just comes through time, full stop. And the only way I could figure out a way to get that much time was to have economic security without being stressed. So everyone has to come to their own decision. If you decide you're not going to live to work, but you want to work to live, fine. You want to coach Little League, make a good living, be a solid citizen, you can absolutely be happy, but have a sober conversation and make sure that your partner is in alignment. That probably means leaving New York, living in a low-cost neighborhood, not taking fat vacations, having a Hyundai. So much of this is about partnership. It's about finding the right partner that's aligned with your goals around saving, spending, responsibilities for the money. And I worry that because of social media and what people see, that they're under the impression that they not only can have it all, which is not true, but when they don't have it all, they feel shame. I don't have a hot boyfriend. I haven't made millions buying NVIDIA. I don't have this out of control rewarding career with millions of followers. I don't have the fat apartment from Succession that every young person seems to have on social media. And the reality is almost nobody has it. They're just vomiting an edited version of their possessions and their experiences. And social media makes everyone feel really shitty about themselves. So I think like the whole trade-off, the whole balance thing, it's a sober conversation with yourself and your partner, but there's no free lunch. The reason I have a lot of balance now is because until they were 5, I hardly ever saw my kids. I'm not saying that's the correct way. I gave up a lot, but that was my decision. And you just have to have an honest conversation with yourself.
Right. Yeah. You were talking about our kids, the students we teach. I have a lot of conversations with them about careers as well. One of the things that comes up a lot, and this may be among your most viral moments, was your discussion of the difference between following your passion and following your talent. The idea that you should do what you're good at, and then ultimately that becomes what you become passionate about. You gave this great example in that talk. I think it was a talk at Stern about iron ore smelting. The idea that no one as a kid grows up saying, I want to be the best iron ore smelting entrepreneur in the world. But what happens is you do something that you're pretty good at and you get other good people around you. You enjoy what you're doing. You become a specialist. You develop a capability. You feel efficacious. You're making good money and so on. Suddenly you've developed a passion. So the passion follows the talent. I think it's a really interesting philosophy. And I wonder, first of all, how you figure that out. You said it took you years to figure out that your talent was, as you say, communicating. How could a lot of parents of, in particular, teenage boys, but not just boys, wrote questions about how they do this, how they tell their kids to do this, how do you figure it out as quickly as possible, or is it not something you can take a shortcut on?
Well, the first is just to recognize, but I think is a fairly straightforward truth, and that is anyone who tells you to follow your passion is usually already rich.
Yeah.
And a lot of young people mistake their passion for a hobby. And the vanity industries are just going to have a lower return on your invested capital. So if you want to be in art, sports, fashion, acting, there are 180,000 people in the SAG-AFTRA union, the union representing actors. These are the most talented actors in the world. Last year, 87% of them didn't qualify for health insurance because they made less than $23,000. So if you want to go into one of the vanity industries, I don't want to crush your dreams, but unless you're getting signals, bright green signals very early that you're in the top 1%, you're not going to make a living at it. That's the bad news. The good news is, all right, what do? You try and find your talent, something you could become a ninja, something you could be in the top 10, maybe even the top 1%. Find your talent. Not easy, you got to workshop it. But if you can find your talent, and then this is the key part, in an industry where there's a 90+% employment rate, and by the way, 98% of industries have a 90+% employment rate. The top 10% of tax accountants are going to be millionaires, live in really nice homes, have a larger selection set of mates than they deserve. The top 10% of basketball players maybe play JV basketball in high school and will never get close to making $1. So you want to find something where if you become a master at it, you can have an amazing life. And the bad news is it's much harder in a passion industry. But here's the good news. Whatever it is, if you become a master at it and you start making a lot of money from it, the accoutrements of that mastery, economic security, camaraderie, relevance, prestige, will make you passionate about whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And so a recognition early on that your hobbies aren't necessarily what you should be doing professionally, because if you're not in 1%, you're not going to be able to make a living. I wanted to be quarterback for the Jets when I was a senior in high school. I got to UCLA and found out, oh no, this is what real athletes look like. Then I thought, I'm going to be a pediatrician. And then I took organic chemistry and realized, oh, okay, I'm not cut out for the sciences. Then I went into investment banking and found out, oh, I'm a shitty investment banker. This is not where I'm going to make my millions. And then I found analytics and wrapping a story around analytics to help companies make decisions. I had never in a million years thought of analytics or business intelligence. And I found out I was good at it and I got great at it. And then all the things it provided me made me passionate about it. So that's your job. One, acknowledge that the passion industries are really, really low ROI, and to exit them if you do not get signals right away, you're in the top 1%. And then just start workshopping different things and recognizing that going into investment banking and finding out it's not for you, that's kind of a win. Okay, that didn't work. Okay, I'm not going to be it. That's okay. Most people take 3 or 4 kind of turns or workshops to figure out what they're good at. But that's it. Find your talent. Don't find your passion, find your talent. And then the mastery and the accoutrements of mastery will make you passionate about whatever it is. I'm curious, Adam, how did you find teaching? Did you go straight away into teaching?
I taught as an undergrad. I was 19 and I taught a law class because they'd lost, one of the professors was sick and he couldn't teach. So they said, can you teach? And I loved it. I enjoyed it. So I realized that if I was going to do something that involved teaching, that it would probably be something I'd be reasonably good at and that I would enjoy. But that's not why I chose academia. I just ended up going down that route later on, and it worked out. It was
that's really lucky. Rare. So you found it very early. That's really unusual.
I was very, very lucky, but I also spent a 3-month period. I was studying actuarial science and I didn't like it. And I spent a 3-month period going to about 50 different first level undergrad lectures. So I went to an English class, an organic chemistry class, a math class, a law class. I bounced around from class to class, just trying to figure out what I thought I would enjoy and what I'd be good at. And so I basically took a crash course in the very beginning of almost every discipline I could get my hands on. And from that, I developed a liking for business, law, and psychology. And I ended up sort of combining them all in a certain way later on. So that was very early on. I was quite lucky. This talent you have for communication, I'm curious about where it came from or how you came to it. You say in the book that it took you a long time to get there. And I'm obviously describing a story where it didn't take quite as long. I was lucky to find what I liked. where do you learn this? Like, what do you hoover up? What sort of information are you consuming? Are you just writing a lot and realizing you're good at it and you have that particular voice? What about delivering speeches and teaching and all of that, and the a TV presence and so on? How do you learn that you're good at this stuff? How does anyone learn they're good at these things? Do you have a sort of recipe guide or a manual for figuring it out reasonably fast? Is there a way you can fast track it?
Well, I mean, it's like athletics. Some of it is just genetic, right?
Yeah.
Um, and by the way, you have an unfair advantage. If I had your accent and your hair, I'd be senator from Pennsylvania right now. So some of it's unfair, some of it's unearned. But I get a lot of my storytelling ability from my father. My father's a great communicator. He was a salesman. And so I've always had a bit of a gift for it. But then again, we I'm on leave now, but when I was teaching, we get to workshop our stuff in front of 300 people
Yeah.
each week. I write a lot. My content has kind of blown up over the last couple of years, but I always joke after working my ass off for 30 years, I'm an overnight success. I do a ton of public speaking. I do a ton of writing, and I just practice a lot. And by the way, sometimes I fail. I still get panic attacks. I thought I was going to faint and pass out. I was on Bill Maher, and my dad watches that program, so I was really nervous about it. And I even said to them, I'm not feeling well. And they said, "You're live in 3 minutes, boss. This is the time. This isn't the time to say you're not feeling well." I mean, they were totally unsympathetic. And I've now been on 5 times and I got through it. But I've a couple times had panic attacks at live talks, which are really, you feel like you're going to die in front of a large audience. But it's like anything. I've practiced, I've taken notes, I have some natural talent, and I'm just, I mean, for God's sakes, how many speeches have we given if you look at all the classes?
Yeah.
So it's like anything. You have some natural talent at it. I have some natural talent at it. I don't know if it's 49% of the game or 51, but the other 49 or 51 is just doing it for several thousand hours
Yeah.
and screwing up and realize why you screwed up or doing well. And I just did a TED talk. It did really well. I know you've done TED. The first one I did, I didn't think was very good. And this one was much better because I really learned from it and really tried. But if I could give my kids any skill, it would be storytelling. It wouldn't be computer science. It wouldn't be Mandarin. It wouldn't even be STEM. It's the ability to communicate ideas in a compelling way that resonates with people. You command their attention and inspire them and soften the beach, open their brain through humor, through turns of phrase, through visualizations that soften their brain and say, I am open to this idea. I'm open to thinking differently. I'm going to take my screens down because this person is such a fantastic storyteller. And I wish I'd learned that much earlier in life, because really good teachers at the end of the day, we become athletes and we can make money a bunch of different ways through storytelling. And teaching is a fantastic platform to get your storytelling muscle in shape. But I spent a lot of time thinking about, all right, I want to be a great decathlete. I want to be able to write. I want to do great written work, great newsletters, great podcasts, great presentations, great talks. The only thing I haven't figured out is TV. I've had 4 TV series and they've all been canceled before they launched or within 4 weeks. So I've finally sort of figured out I might have a face for podcasting. But my goal is to be able to tell stories across multiple dimensions. And there's a bit of a flywheel effect.
Yeah.
If you write a book and then give a talk about it, I mean, you and I make a lot of money speaking, but the thing that juices our speaking career is books. And the thing that juices books is videos. And if you do a good job, if your book is really good, it informs your teaching. And you might be in class and come up with a new concept or idea, there is a flywheel to the storytelling. So what I'll call multimodal or multimedia or cross-channel storytelling has always been my goal. And I've really focused on it for about good 20, 25 years now.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I want to we've got a few more minutes. I want to talk a little bit about some broader ideas that go a little bit beyond the book. You do talk in the book about this hedonic treadmill idea, which I've always found really interesting. This is the idea that, as humans earn more, we move up the hierarchy, we move up the ladder. There's always someone above us. You can always look above, no matter how high up the ladder you get, there's going to be someone above you. And you talk about this story of, I think it's Eric Schmidt seeing Steve Jobs' yacht, and the yacht's bigger than his boat, or it's more impressive than his boat. And this idea that, even someone who's right at the top of the tree, there are going to be a couple of people on even higher branches. And so you're always kind of chasing this. And it's a real sort of source of dissatisfaction as humans because we're constantly upward comparing ourselves.
Yeah.
Sort of robs us of joy. How do you deal with that? Now, one thing you talk about is that you have a number and you got to that number and now you're decumulating or you're spending or you're figuring out ways to actually use that money to enrich your connection with your boys, for example. But how do you avoid this, especially as you've moved up significantly in that ladder over time, as you've described it? How do you prevent yourself from feeling that sense that there are always others around you who have more, or don't you?
Well, I've read a lot of research, including yours, around where
Yeah.
people get real happiness and reward.
Yeah.
And I don't believe in hoarding wealth. I don't think there's any reason anyone needs more. I love to spend money. I'm good at it. I love having it. But I don't think there's any reason for anyone to have more than $100 million. If you look at Kahneman, he says, there's a myth that money can't buy happiness. That's bullshit. It can. People in middle income homes are happier than low income, higher income are happier than middle. That's the bad news. The good news is that there's diminishing returns. The difference between making $50,000 and $250,000 a year, a lot of happiness. Between 250 and a million, still significantly more happy. Between a million and 10 million, small. Anything above 10 million, not really going to change your life in any discernible way. And so I made a conscious decision once I got to my number, the way I was going to get happy was I was just going to do a bunch of amazing things with my friends and my family. And I was only going to accept work where I thought I could have real influence or some sort of social impact or something that just seemed like a lot of fun. And the way I describe it is there's three buckets. There's things you have to do. So if the dean calls us and says, hey, I need you to speak at this thing, we have to do that. And we have to pretend that we want to do it. Then there's the want bucket, right? Your mates your good friend is organizing a trip to, Vegas, or friends from college. You want to do that, right? And then there's things you should do. A friend from work's daughter is getting bat mitzvahed. There's someone giving a seminar and you should really go to it. All the shoulds. For me, economic security, I have canceled the should bucket. Do I have to do this? Do I want to do it? I no longer am in the business of should. I'm very selfish that way. And I am massively spending time and money on experiences. And I also struggle with anger and depression. And a lot of it was around, I held grudges against people and against the world when I wasn't as successful as I wanted. And someone said something really powerful to me about 20 years ago, and I've tried to live my life this way. The best revenge is to live an amazing life. And so I am totally focused on doing crazy, amazing, cool things with money. I like giving money away, and I don't say that for virtue signaling. It makes me feel masculine. It makes me feel like a baller to give money away. It makes me feel really important and good. So I'm just decided that my ultimate revenge against all of my enemies, Adam, is to live an amazing life. And in a capitalist society, money is an incredible lubricant for that. But beyond a certain amount of money, the frightening thing about money is it gets quantified by something evil, and that is a number. Because as much money as I have, I can imagine 10 times, no problem. I know some people that have 10 or 100 times the amount of money as me, and I'm like, okay, I got to get back on the treadmill. So I consciously have to say no. The way I know I can get happier is by having a series of amazing experiences that make me feel closer to people, to my community, to my country. And that's where I'm going to spend all my money. And I don't need a bigger number. I still would like it. I'm not dumb. I'm still investing. I still like making money. I enjoy it. But I'm going to I no longer hoard wealth. I think one of the terrible things about our society, I don't think there's anyone that needs to be worth $100 billion. It's not going to make you any happier. It's just not. By the way, I don't think there's a lot of evidence that your kids are going to be any happier. As a matter of fact, there's some evidence that your kids may be less happy when you have that kind of money. So why wouldn't you, above a certain number, and granted it's a big number, just do amazing things with your friends and family? Like why? And it's very selfish. Why wouldn't you rent a boat in Greece? Why wouldn't you find out there's this great, suicide hotline helping trans kids, and they literally don't have enough money, and you can like hire three. I mean, I'm doing a lot of virtue signaling right now, but I do this shit because it like makes me feel really important.
Yeah.
Makes me feel really good. It makes me feel like, wow, I'm really successful. But you got to get off You have your number. And once you hit your number, realize money is an ink in the pen. It helps you write new chapters. It helps certain chapters burn brighter, not your story. You have to have another story because this is the fear. You end up in the gold circle wing, and this exists at Langone, NYU. And it's where rich people who've given a lot of money to the hospital go to when they're sick and where they go when they die. And it's like a Four Seasons. And this is the risk. You're there, you have all the money in the world, but you're surrounded by strangers. And your kids, for whatever reason, don't seem to manage to get there in your final days. And the people around you don't give you a tremendous amount of comfort because they don't love you that much. That's the fear. And something I've spent a lot of time thinking about is I am too focused on what strangers think of me and not focused enough on what the people who I live with think of me. And I've spent the last 20 years trying to flip that. Doesn't matter what Twitter thinks of me. It just doesn't matter, especially now. I don't need their approval. I don't need the money. I need my kids. I need my neighbors. I need my countrymen. I want them to feel like I'm impressive and that I'm a good person, that they're seeing me up close and I'm a good person. It is very easy to get so used to that treadmill around money and around affirmation from strangers and status that you sacrifice your personal relationships. I know a lot of wealthy people who are admired and loved by people who don't know them and just have terrible relationships with their spouses and their kids. That is literally the definition of capitalist failure.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. What do you think about the idea then, if we're all on the treadmill and we could all, or most of us are in a position where a little bit more would make us happier and better off. One of the ideas floated is to do something like giving everyone at birth, if the government gives you, as they do in Finland, they give you this little box with all sorts of stuff that's useful when you have a baby, which we don't do in the United States. But the idea is this is a good place to begin. And then from there, you go do your thing and you become a parent, you learn all the ropes. But one of the things that's been floated is this idea of giving everyone, say, $5,000 or $7,000 or $10,000 that's automatically invested, the way you described with your first bonus. Mm-hmm. And so at birth, you're investing, say, $10,000 in the stock market, and then you have access to it from the age of, say, 50 or 60 or 70, whatever it might be. And basically, you're taking the level at which all the boats sit and you're rising the tide for everybody. Do you think there's virtue in that kind of idea, or then are we all still stuck on the treadmill to some extent? To me, that makes a lot of sense, right? It's a very efficient way for government to help us all. But what do you think of an idea like that?
I think it's a great idea, and they're doing it in your native country. Australia, I think, has the super fund.
Yeah, they do. That's right. Yeah.
I think so. For $40 billion a year, we could give every kid $6,000.
Right.
Which means by the time they're 65, I think they have 1 or 2 million. And the thing I like about it is we could eliminate this massive transfer of wealth from young to old called Social Security. And I think it would pay for itself because 20 or 30 years in, knowing that Social Security was no longer going to be needed would bring interest rates down, which would mean the interest on the debt we are having to finance because of Social Security would become less costly and it would pay for itself. So one of the keys to wealth, quite frankly, is forced savings. Capitalism offers so many amazing ways to spend money. And then there's this godlike technology that at exactly the right moment goes, Scott, do you want to add flourless chocolate cake to your order from Joe and the Juice? And I'm like, well, of course I do. Why wouldn't I? I love flourless chocolate cake. Oh, and it's from Balthazar Boulangerie. And the photograph is so beautiful. And it's 10 in the morning and I'm ordering chocolate cake. Well, Scott, you're going to Stagecoach. Well, it's $1,200 for a VIP pass, but for $2,200, you can have an artist pass and you get backstage with Willie Nelson. I'm like, well, Jesus Christ, it's $1,200 already. Why would assume every dollar you have access to, you will spend? And I know it's terrible, but I've been that way. I've never spent more than I had, but it wasn't like I was great at saving. 99% of Americans are not great at saving. So you want to set up forced savings. Acorns, round up your nearest dollar of spending, goes right to SPY. Find out your company, the government, any matching programs, and make sure the money gets taken out of your paycheck so you never see it. I have a crazy amount of money in our 401k, our matching program through NYU. I almost didn't do it. And I thought, well, I know I should do it. The flaw in our species is we haven't been here for 99% of our time on this planet. We haven't lived past 34. So we don't recognize you're going to be here a lot longer than you think. And it's going to go a lot faster than you think. So forced savings, a house is essentially forced savings because people don't want to get kicked out of their house. So they force themselves to save. 401ks, IRAs, Roths, spending apps that round up. And then what you're talking about, the idea that we give every baby a certain amount of money, it's taken out of their hands. They never get access to it until they're 55 or 65. And then they have access to it. I just did, in the power of compound interest, I just did this analysis. When I was living in New York, I was going to send my kids to Grace Church or First Presbyterian because I thought, okay, I want to give my kids the best. I wanted to signal to my friends that I was successful, send them to the Tony Wright schools downtown. I'm sure you've gone through the same thing. Mm-hmm. It's $65,000 a year now. And why do we want to send our kids? There's some research showing that the best thing you can do for your kids is send them to the closest school and then take all that time they save in the commute and invest in sleep, homework, time with their parents. But let's assume that these schools are better. And I would argue they probably aren't a balanced scorecard better. And you want to give your kid the best start possible. Why do you want to give them the best start possible? Well, some of that's for emotional health, but maybe emotional health is a function of getting some resilience. So I got some of my resilience going to public schools. But at a minimum, you want to give them economic advantage. That's important in America. And there's studies that show these private schools send people to better schools. They end up economically better off. Okay, fine, I get it. Send them to the public school, take that $62,000 a year, put it in SBY, low-cost index funds from the age of 3 to 18, and assume you're right, and the public school you sent them to does not give them the advantage you'd hoped. Here's the thing. If you just invest all of that in an index fund over the 14 years they've been in school, when they're 35, one of two things has happened. Oh, I was wrong. Public school, they're just fine. They're economically secure. But oh, wait, I was wrong. I should have sent them to First Presbyterian or Grace Church. I was wrong. Well, it's okay because you're going to have $5.5 million you can give to your kid, which will solve a lot of problems. Mm-hmm. And just that, I feel like it, and the reality is like 2/3 of the people sending their kids to these schools, they're not poor, but that's a meaningful amount of money for them. Mm-hmm. That's like, okay, this is real money. This is going to change the quality of my life. And it's like, well, why are you sending them? Why are you doing this? And it comes down to, I want them to have a nice life. When you say nice life, what do you mean? I mean, economics. Well, here's an idea. Take the risk. And in case you're wrong, here's $5.5 million you can give them when they're 35. Mm-hmm. But there's some basics that we don't even realize, the power of time and compound interest and how much it pays off. And I wish this is sort of a letter to myself, like, don't be an idiot. Do these few things, and you're going to have an absence of stress when you're 59. And guess what, boss? You're going to be 59 so fast, it's going to spin your head.
I believe it.
Adam, thanks for an excellent interview with Professor Galloway. Thank you so much. It was really, really great. We're at 1:30, so we're right at our cutoff time. I want to remind folks we are going to do an after-hours segment, 25 minutes with both Adam and Scott. It's going to start in about 5 minutes from now. Access to after hours, make a meaningful donation to FAN and whatever that means to you. Link is in chat. Come hang out, ask your own questions. Thanks so much for joining us today. Hope to welcome you at Bob Sutton on Wednesday. See Scott and Adam. See you in about 5 minutes.